The motorcycle is unforgiving, but so am I. That wasn't a complaint. That was a raw confession, complete with a timestamp. Because he is no longer losing races at the checkered flag. He is losing them long before the race truly begins. 3 rounds in, and 0 podium finishes. There was one sprint victory that reminded everyone he still possesses that killer edge, yet the main races on Sunday have been decided by the 3rd lap. The battle was already over before it ever really started. Marco Bezzecchi didn't simply defeat him at Coda. He erased him from the contest entirely before Marc's race had even begun. That is the true price being paid. Not positions, not points, control. Coda laid it bare in painful slow motion. The crash during practice wasn't merely an error. It was the body failing to find the razor-thin margin it once trusted without question. The sprint collision with Fabio Di Giannantonio wasn't reckless aggression. It was pure instinct firing ahead of what the body and machine could actually support. The long lap penalty pushed him back into the chaos of traffic, a place the old Marc once thrived in. This version of Marc now has to fight just to survive it. He battled with Bagnaia. He overtook Bastianini. He clawed his way up to 5th place like a man determined to prove something to himself. But the leaders had already vanished. Bezzecchi was out front dictating terms. Martin was calmly managing the race. The contest had moved on without him. Marc arrived late to a war that had already been declared. Francesco Bagnaia outqualified him on the exact same machinery. That is not just a statistic, that is a fundamental shift. The factory handed both riders identical weapons. One rider placed it on the front row. The other started from behind the real battle. Marc has built his entire career on dominating the opening stages of a race. Now he finds himself constantly reacting instead of dictating. That isn't adaptation, that is damage control. And damage control never wins championships. It only decides how gracefully you lose. Juan Martinez watched the overtakes and declared that the DNA remains untouched. He is correct. Marc can still make passes in corners where no one else would dare. He can still see gaps that simply do not exist for any other rider. But raw talent and instinct no longer decide modern races, sequence does. The first 3 laps determine who seizes control of the race. Right now, Marc is not part of that decisive sequence. He is forced to rebuild everything from behind. Every bold overtake serves as proof of what he still is. Every lap spent chasing serves as proof of what he no longer commands. Look at the numbers that nobody dares speak aloud. Bezzecchi, 5 straight wins, 121 laps led without a single break. That is not merely superior pace, that is total occupation. The moment the lights go out, he owns the race. Marc, meanwhile, is left negotiating his way into a race that is already firmly under someone else's command. Matching Bezzecchi's late race pace doesn't rescue him, it actually condemns him, because it proves the speed was always present. What was missing was control. The shoulder injury is not just a storyline, it is a permanent cost. Mandalika didn't only hurt Marc physically, it stole the final millimeter of confidence, the one that once allowed him to attack the first lap without a second thought. Now hesitation lingers. It isn't obvious. It isn't admitted, but it reveals itself in those critical opening laps where he appears tight and restricted rather than loose and fluid. Martinez himself admitted it. He is not completely relaxed. That single difference separates the leader from the chaser, the decision maker from the reactor, the one who controls the race from the one merely trying to survive it. And Ducati understands this reality perfectly. They engineered the GP26 to be aggressive into corners, front-end focused, and demanding absolute commitment right from the start. That motorcycle refuses to wait for a rider to settle in. It punishes any trace of hesitation. Bagnaia spent an entire year warning them about the same issues with the GP25. No one truly listened. Now Marc is saying the exact same things. Instead of addressing the root problem, Ducati gave him an evolved version of the same demanding machine, one that requires precisely what his recovering body is still struggling to deliver: total trust and full commitment from lap 1. That is not a minor setup problem, that is a deep structural mismatch. Pedro Acosta already sits 3rd in the championship standings. Fabio Di Giannantonio claimed pole at Coda and finished ahead of Marc in Brazil. Jorge Martin is executing races with mechanical precision. And Bezzecchi, he isn't merely racing them, he is systematically removing them from contention. Marc isn't losing to a single rider, he is losing to an entire system that brutally punishes any delay in taking control. And right now, he is delayed. The most dangerous illusion circulating in the paddock is the belief that this is simply a slow beginning, that once Marc fine-tunes the small details, everything will magically return to normal. That is comfort speaking, not honest analysis. Because fine-tuning cannot restore the lost opening phase. It cannot bring back that instinctive first-lap aggression that commits before the gap even appears. It cannot change the fact that races are now being decided long before Marc finds his rhythm. By the time he becomes the old Marc again, the race has already been claimed by someone else, and that changes everything. Races are no longer truly won on Sunday. They are decided in the first 3 laps. Ducati has built a motorcycle that demands total commitment exactly in the phase where Marc Marquez cannot yet deliver it fully. That is the mechanism at work, not bad luck, not rust. Design. The GP26 is not a neutral platform. It is front-end aggressive and entry-loaded, engineered to reward riders who attack instantly while punishing those who need even 1 lap to build confidence. Bagnaia told Ducati this last year in clear terms: front-end instability, lack of trust on new tires, and zero control in the opening phase. He said it publicly and repeatedly. Ducati dismissed it as something that required adaptation. Then they doubled down on the same philosophy. Now Marc is riding the direct result of that choice, and the cost is visible in every single opening lap he fails to control. COTA made the issue impossible to ignore. Fresh tires, maximum grip, exactly the phase where races are won and lost. Marc was not flowing naturally. Martinez noticed it immediately. Tight lines, delayed commitment, the bike demanding more than the body was prepared to give. That is not a riding deficiency. It is a clear mismatch between what the machine requires and what the rider's current physical state can provide. The GP26 demands pure instinct without hesitation. Marc is still carefully negotiating that final millimeter that Mandalika took away. The result? The bike refuses to turn when he needs it most. The front end fails to deliver the confidence required for full commitment, and the race pulls away before he can correct it. Mugello exposed the same weakness from the opposite angle. He dominated the sprint, controlled the early stages, then faded. Why? Because the same aggressive front end that demands early commitment becomes unstable and unpredictable the moment track conditions shift even slightly. Ducati did not create a stable, forgiving platform. They created a high-risk weapon with an extremely narrow operating window. Hit it perfectly, and it performs brilliantly. Miss it by even a small margin, and it falls apart. Marc is missing it in the early stages. Bagnaia is losing it in the middle phases. Different symptoms, same underlying machine. While Ducati continues wrestling with its own design choices, Aprilia solved the problem completely. Bezzecchi does not negotiate with his motorcycle. He commands it from the very first lap. 5 consecutive wins. 121 laps led without interruption, not because he is faster in the closing stages, but because he never allows the race to become a contest in the first place. Clean air, controlled braking, a stable front end. He doesn't need to search for rhythm. He begins with it already in place. That is not rider magic. That is perfect system alignment. Jorge Martin recognized the danger earlier than most. He walked away from Ducati after winning a title because he understood the direction was not just slower, it was fundamentally wrong. Aprilia gave him a machine that enables flawless execution from lap 1. Ducati gave Marc a machine that requires adaptation before any execution can even begin. In modern MotoGP, that delay is deadly. Look at the clear pattern that few want to acknowledge. Marc, blistering speed, strong late pace, but zero early control. Bagnaia, strong early control, but lacking sustained stability. Ducati, outright speed everywhere, yet control nowhere. These are not 3 separate problems. They are 3 different expressions of one single design decision. Ducati pursued peak performance at all costs. Aprilia prioritized controllability. The engine regulations froze everything in place. No major reset, no escape route. The platform you choose becomes the war you fight for the entire season. Pedro Acosta is exploiting the situation perfectly. He refuses to wait. He attacks the opening phase because his KTM allows him to. Di Giannantonio took pole at COTA because single-lap commitment still exists. But races are not decided in 1 lap. They are decided by sequence, and Ducati is losing that critical sequence before the tires have even properly warmed up. The paddock continues to call this an alignment issue, as if it were merely a setup problem waiting to be solved. It is not. It is structural. You cannot align a motorcycle that consistently demands something the rider cannot yet reliably deliver. You must either change the rider or change the machine. Ducati chose to do neither. They gave the same demanding philosophy to a rider who is still recovering from an injury that directly impacts the exact phase the bike demands most aggressively. That is not bad fortune. That is inevitability. And here is the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to admit. Marc Marquez's DNA is still intact. The spectacular overtakes prove it. The late race pace proves it. The instincts are still burning. But the system he is operating inside is built to reward something he cannot yet fully access: instant, unquestioned authority from lap 1. Every lap he spends searching for rhythm is a lap that Bezzecchi uses to build a gap that becomes impossible to close. Every overtake Marc executes is merely correcting a problem that the leader never had to face. Ducati did not lose performance. They engineered a situation in which their riders consistently arrive late to their own races. Aprilia, on the other hand, built a machine that never arrives late at all. The verdict is already clear. Marc Marquez is no longer fighting for control of the races, he is fighting just to gain entry into them. And championships do not wait for late arrivals. 3 rounds completed, 36 points behind. That gap may not look fatal in April, but it becomes nearly impossible to overcome by midsummer. Because the rider currently leading this championship is not simply trading victories. He is systematically eliminating variables. Marco Bezzecchi has led 121 consecutive laps. Not a single rider has managed to seize control from him once the race is underway. Not one interruption. That is not good form. That is complete ownership of the race structure itself. And Marc is not operating inside that structure. Every piece of unused data points in the same direction. Marc matched Bezzecchi's pace in the final stages at Coda. That should have sent a warning to the entire grid. Instead, it became a warning about Marc himself because it proved something far worse than simply being slower. It proved he possessed the speed but still could not access the race in time. The leader did not beat him. The sequence did. By the time Marc finally reached Bezzecchi's pace, the gap had already been built. The race had already been decided. That door does not reopen. Francesco Bagnaia sits in the same garage, on the same machine, and suffers a different kind of collapse. He qualified ahead, led sections of the race, and still finished outside the top 10. That is not simply a bad race. That is the machine exposing its rider the moment conditions move even slightly outside its narrow window. Ducati now has 2 riders, one who cannot control the beginning and another who cannot sustain the middle. Meanwhile, the championship is being dominated by a rider who controls both phases without ever losing command. That is not competition, that is displacement. Pedro Acosta sits 3rd in the standings with a KTM that was expected to be unreliable. Fabio Di Giannantonio has a pole position and consistent front row presence. Jorge Martin is delivering error-free race execution. Every single one of them possesses something Marc currently lacks: immediate integration into the race from the very first lap. They do not need recovery rides. They do not need dramatic late surges. They begin inside the fight. Marc begins outside it. The penalties are not random misfortunes. The long lap penalty at Coda resulted from committing to a gap that no longer existed. That was the old instinct attempting to operate within new physical limitations. The body is not yet fully ready. The bike demands it regardless. That gap between instinct and execution is exactly where the championship is slowly bleeding away. Every time Marc is forced to correct his position, the leading group pulls further ahead. Every time he rejoins the battle, the race has already moved on without him. That is not a simple riding mistake. That is the entire system rejecting his current physical reality. Ducati's decision is now permanent. Engine freeze means no radical changes. The GP26 will remain the platform for the entire season with the same aggressive front-end demands, the same narrow operating window, and the same requirement for immediate authority. Marc will undoubtedly grow stronger physically as the season progresses, that is certain. But the real question remains, will it be enough to reclaim the exact phase where the championship is being decided? Because Bezzecchi is not waiting for that answer. He is building a points advantage that does not even require Marc to be beaten outright, only delayed. And this is where the familiar narrative finally breaks down. DNA intact is not a solution. It is a distraction. It reminds us of what Marc still possesses. It conveniently hides what the current system no longer permits him to do. You can still have the instincts. You can still have the speed. You can still have the aggression. But if you do not control the opening phase, you do not control the race. And if you do not control the race, you do not control the championship. This is no longer about whether Marc can win individual races later in the season. It is about whether the championship will still be mathematically alive by the time he finally manages to arrive strong on lap 1. Because right now, the pattern is not random fluctuation, it is a repeating chain. He starts behind. He recovers late. The leader escapes early. That chain does not break on its own. So the real question is not whether Marc Marquez's DNA remains intact. The real question is this. If the fastest rider on the grid cannot access the first 3 laps, what exactly is he still competing for by the time he finally reaches the pace he used to begin with? GP24 doesn't just cover MotoGP. We cover its war.